You have the deliverance of God up there. Is that the? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, lesson 5, the favor of God. Yeah, we skipped a lesson because we had a missionary last week, so we're a little off, which is normal for us. We're always a little off. Praise the Lord, Rick got both buses going today, or yesterday, right? Day before. I don't know what day it was. We had to buy batteries for the white one, but it started right up. And that white one hasn't been started in, it started right up as far as I'm talking. Rick had to do a little bit, but it's pretty much started right up. So yeah, pray about that. Make some phone calls, see about selling them. We need to get a van, so pray about that too. And it's good to see John and Megan and John just had a real traumatic experience with Maddie this week. Some of you that don't have Facebook and stuff may not even know, but Maddie had a pretty bad seizure Thursday, and she was actually airlifted down to Lehigh Valley, and it's just a miracle. I mean, a flat-out miracle that she went home the next morning, or the next day, and so she's doing well. So keep praying for Maddie, and so praise the Lord for that. That's good news. Thank you, Travis. You got it now, bro. And yeah, we kind of got off track a little bit with the missionary last week. Today we're talking about the favor of God. And you know, as I was studying this lesson, reading through the scripture, it made me realize how thankful I am for the favor of God. Do we deserve that? Do we deserve his divine favor? We don't. But God shows us divine favor. You know, he did that with Mordecai, Esther, heathen king, heathen land. God showed them favor. And of course, kind of a parallel study is Daniel and his companions. Same thing. Daniel found favor. You know, who did that? God. Because God showed favor. And you know, that's grace because we don't do anything to deserve that divine favor, right? God just shows us divine favor. You know, our country, God has shown America divine favor. I mean, you talk about the wars and everything that we've been through. I pray that divine favor keeps going. Sometimes I wonder how much longer it can keep going. But, you know, I think about Israel. God says, I'll bless them that bless you, and I'll curse them that curse you. And boy, we see that reality, I think, even with our own country and around the world. And so God has shown our country favor. Do we deserve it? No way, right? So today we're talking about the favor of God. Let's look at Esther chapter 5, Esther 5, and verse 1. Now it came to pass on the third day. Now you remember in chapter 4, Haman kind of tricked King Ahasuerus, and he signed a decree, basically to kill all the Jews. But the crazy thing about it wasn't right now. There was a time period. And so when you think about it, again, God was working. God was doing this whole thing. Rather than, you know, marching through the streets and killing all the Jews, there was a delay, you know. And so why did Haman do such a dumb thing? I think his pride and everything. But it wasn't a dumb thing that he did. It was God. It was God that caused this delay. Now, during this delay, brings us to our story here, right? So the death warrant for the Jews have already been signed, but nothing was happening yet, right? And so here we have the story from last week, or 2 weeks ago actually, that The decree went out. The Jews were weeping, remember? Mourning, praying to God, right? Mordecai called Esther, sent word to Esther saying, you have to go see the king. She's like, man, I can't just walk in there, you know? He could kill me. So, the culture was, if somebody came in unannounced and the king ignored them, they'd be basically taken out and killed. But if the king would hold up his golden scepter, right, they would walk over and touch it. That meant mercy. That meant acceptance. And so would Esther see the golden scepter raised? Could you imagine walking into that room wondering what kind of mood the guy was in? That kind of power that he had, where he could just ignore you and the soldiers would just take you out, right? And but what was going to happen? So that's where we are now in the story, how God was showing Esther and Mordecai favor, right? Anyways, now it came to pass on the third day that they prayed for 3 days. Esther said, okay, I'll do it, but here's my criteria. I want praying and fasting for 3 days. So Esther told all of her maidens, I want prayer and fasting for 3 days. Told Mordecai, I want you to tell all the Jewish friends, all the people, pray, fast for 3 days. Because why? Man, my head and my neck is on the line. And so the third day, the praying's over, the fasting's over. Now she's walking in there, and she put on her royal apparel. She stood in the inner court of the king's house. Now keep in mind, this was off limits. She was where she was not supposed to be, but she just did it by faith, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, look at this next phrase, that she obtained what? Favor in his sight. Man, that's God right there. That is the grace of God. And she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? What is thy request? Hey, he knew it was unusual. He knew she must have needed something. She must have wanted something. And so, man, God touched his heart. Show favor. He held up that golden scepter. She walked over, touched it, and then he begins to ask her, what do you want? What do you need? It's kind of like Nehemiah, just popping into my head. Another, wicked king. Nehemiah was a cupbearer, and he was not supposed to show any type of sadness, any type of depression, whatever. Otherwise, the king would be getting a new cupbearer. I don't want to be depressed by your face, So Nehemiah went in there, heartbroken, over Jerusalem, and the king says, what's the matter? I see that you're down today. And Nehemiah is like, man, that's it for me. But what did he do? He pours his heart out about his country, about Jerusalem and the walls, and the king says, what do you need? That's a miracle. Heathen king, what do you need? Well, man, we need some workers. We need some blocks. We need some wood. All right. He writes it all out. Gives Nehemiah all the letters that he needs to travel. Gives Nehemiah all the orders he needs for the material. And sends him on his way. And you just scratch your head and think, wow. I think Nehemiah was thinking, did that just happen? Did that just happen? And here we have a similar story. And the king, his heart is being touched by God, right? Because God works in the hearts of kings. And here's King Ahasuerus saying, what do you need? What is it that you need, right? And so, but look at this. What wilt thou, Queen Esther? Right? In verse 3. What is thy request? Look at this here, what he says. It's amazing. It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. Man, he must have really thought a lot of Esther. He must have loved Esther. Now, we do not see Esther doing any type of sensual dance here or anything like that. Remember, John the Baptist had his head cut off. And why? Because of that sensual dance. And the king got all worked up and said, what is it you want? I'll give you whatever you want. She said, bring me the head of John the Baptist on a silver charger. This was not one of those situations. Here she was, just in her royal apparel. She was beautiful, obviously. And so he tells her, I'll give you up to half, because that's what the law said he could do. I'll give you up to half of the kingdom, right? And Esther answered, if it seem good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day. And by the way, it shows the kind of person Esther was. Because in my flesh, I'd have been like, okay, give me half, I'll take it, thanks for the offer. But she didn't do that. Notice how she was selfless. She did not do that, and she could have done that. She could have looked out for herself. I want, my own palace with my uncle Mordecai. I want protection. I want this. I want that. She didn't do any of that, right? Anyways, if it seemed good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared. Hey, she's already prepared a banquet. She's already prepared the food, right? She already has it planned. She already has it in the works. Now, where do you think she got this idea? You think she just came up with it? No. Book of James says in chapter 1, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, which gives to all men liberally, right? And so I think when I know she was praying. She wasn't just praying, just mindlessly, right? She was praying for wisdom, right? Lord, I'm going to be going in there, touch the king's heart. Lord, give me wisdom, And so this was part of that wisdom that God gave her. If it seemed good, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. The king's thinking, okay, this can't be all of it. You just want me to come to your banquet? No. So they get to the banquet's going on, and he says, okay, now tell me, what is it you really want? Now, look at this. This is interesting, right? And what is your petition? It shall be granted thee. What is thy request? Again, even to half my kingdom, it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition, to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow, as the king has said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful, with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation. That's just an old-fashioned word for hate, right? Against Mordecai. Nevertheless, look at verse 10. Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends, right? And Zeresh, his wife. Now keep in mind, he's at this banquet. Haman's already so full of pride, he's already puffed up, saying, I can't believe I got invited to this banquet with King Ahasuerus, Queen Esther, and on top of it, they invited me to come back tomorrow for another banquet. I mean, he's on cloud nine, he's floating, right? Now he leaves, and who does he run into while he's floating? Mordecai. And he was so upset, thinking, he refrained himself. He thought, you know what? Who cares about Mordecai today? Because I have just dined with the king and queen. I'm dining with them again tomorrow. Who cares about you, Mordecai? I'll take care of you on a different day. So he goes home, calls all of his friends, right? Because this is who he was. He calls all of his friends. He calls his wife in. He says, guess what I did today? Right? And on top of that, guess what I'm doing tomorrow? And man, they were backslapping. Can you imagine? Man, you're the best, Haman. This is awesome. And it says here in verse 11, and Haman told them of the glory of the riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, how he advanced him above all the princes and servants of the king. This guy was so full of himself, right? In verse number 12, Haman said moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow am I invited unto her also with the king. Right? So, here's Haman. He's on cloud 9. He calls his wife in, his friends. He tells them all this stuff. And he says, I'm going to this banquet tomorrow. Now, he's about to make a very, very bad decision here. Right? And by the way, his wife is the one that puts it in his head to do it. Right? You need to make this gallows 50 cubits high. Now, if you do the math on that, that's like 75 feet. Now, we don't know if it was a gallows that was actually built 75 feet or if it was put up 75 feet. I don't know, but bottom line is it was 75 feet, 50 cubits. And he was going to hang Mordecai after the banquet. Right? I'll take care of you after the banquet. And that's what happened. So we think about decisions, you know. God says if you dig a pit, right? The book of Proverbs, book of wisdom says, be careful if you dig a pit, you know, because that's the way they did battle. That's the way they caught animals. You dig a pit, it has a purpose of it, to catch somebody, to hurt somebody, to catch an animal. But God says also be careful when you dig a pit that you don't fall in yourself. And when you roll a stone, be careful, because that could have ramifications that stone could roll back on you. So be careful about decisions that you make. Think about David in his life. He made some good ones. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that defies the armies of God and blasphemes God? You know, I'm going to fight him. That was a good decision. He also made some bad decisions, right? And we can see through the Bible, Peter made some great decisions. Like to get out of that boat, he still holds the record for walking on water, right? But he made some bad decisions, right? So all through the Bible, we see people that made good. Abraham, right? I've been preaching on Abraham because of our subject matter. Abraham, man, he made some great decisions. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, who you love very much, offer him up for me, a sacrifice. What? I don't understand that, but I'm going to do it, right? Because I believe God. I trust you, God. Man, that's a great decision. But he also made some bad decisions, right? During the famine, he goes down to Egypt. He lies and does some things. So life is about what? Decisions. Good decisions, bad decisions. But realize this. We make decisions, we're going to have to suffer or enjoy the consequences. Man, if I took time to say, hey, share with us some of your good decisions, that would be easier to do. But what if I said, man, hey, go ahead and share with us this morning some of your bonehead, stupid decisions? Man, that'd be kind of embarrassing, man. I don't want to do that, right? I'd rather talk about my good decisions. Right? So here, let's pick up the story again. The decree's already been made to kill the Jews, but it was delayed. For whatever crazy reason, it was delayed. Right? During this delay, Mordecai says, hey, we got to do something. Right? And that famous verse in the book of Esther about how God put you here for such a time as what? This. But But he didn't mention God because remember, the name of God or God is not mentioned even one time in the book of Esther, which is crazy. But nonetheless, God is through the book of Esther. We've been talking about it every week. And so today we're talking about his divine favor that he's showing to Mordecai and Esther, even though God's not mentioned personally by name. And so Mordecai tells Esther, you were placed here for such a time as this, right? You need to step up. You know, that's a hard thing to do. It's always easy to sit in the shadows and just let other people do or fight or whatever. And so he told Esther, you know, and it's time to stand up. So we already talked about the 3 days of fasting and whatnot. Esther goes in there, and I already went through a lot of the lesson, right? But let's look at the outline nonetheless, right? There it is, right there, Esther 4, verse 14. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? So, the outline. Esther petition of the king. Esther's petition of the king. Now, remember what Proverbs says, 21, verse 1. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turneth it whithersoever he will. So we need to be reminded that God is in control. She petitioned the king. How did she do it? Number one, she was prayerful. She was prayerful. Before you make any decision in your life, what should we do? Pray. We should talk to the Lord, right? Have you ever made a rash decision without praying it through? If we're honest with ourselves, we would say yes. We have all made rash decisions, right? We get angry, and we just make a decision. I'll show them. I'll show you. Most of the time, who do we end up hurting? Ourselves, right? So, what we need to do is not make decisions based on emotion, right? Don't make decisions based on flesh, like we talked about Lot a couple weeks ago, right? He made decisions based on what? Money. I'm going to live in these well-watered plains of Sodom because this is where I will do the best financially. How'd that work out? Not good. He did not pray. Abraham said, you go to the right, I'll go to the left, vice versa. We do not see Lot saying, Lord, what should I do? What would be the best direction for me and my family? He didn't do any of that, right? He made totally fleshly decisions. So a sidebar to this lesson is, hey, let's not make decisions, rash decisions. Let's pray about that. Let's not be pressured to make rash decisions, because that can happen. People will pressure us to make a rash decision. It could be your boss at work says, I want a decision right now. You say, well, I'm sorry, I can't give you a decision right now. I got to think about this, pray about this, talk to my wife about this or my husband about this. And so we can't be pressured into making rash decisions. And so prayerful. They prayed 3 days. Think about that. Fasted and prayed. Ask God for mercy. Don't let him kill me. Touch his heart, God, that he'll raise that scepter. And the Lord give me wisdom, right? If he does let me live, give me wisdom. So they were very, very prayerful. And that's what it says in our previous chapter. We talked about that, so we're not going to read that. All right? But she sought God's favor. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 16. This is some wisdom that talks about petitioning God. Right? The preparations of the heart of man and the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. Think about that. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thought shall be established. Now, God doesn't make anybody do anything, but God will put it in the heart of people to do certain things. Do you remember one big one that God did? Right? Pharaoh. right? God put it in his heart, right? Just to be stubborn and ornery. Now, God wasn't making him do that, per se, and we can talk about some of these interesting conversations about the sovereignty of God. Yes, God is sovereign, but, sometimes he'll work with our orneriness, right? And he'll allow that to happen to accomplish his will. So that's what we're talking about. Even King Saul, it's amazing. You ever read in the Bible where it says an evil spirit from the Lord troubled King Saul? Man, what's with that? An evil spirit from the Lord. Wow, that's interesting, right? But anyways, Saul already had the bad spirit, right? But what was God doing? God was working through that to accomplish his will. And I guess that's the best, simplest way I can explain it, because we do scratch our heads about some of these things. God has a purpose and a plan, and it will be accomplished. And yada, yada. Satan can do the same thing, right? It's amazing. David numbered the people. God said, don't number the people, trust me. And David numbered the people, and God got angry and killed like 30-some thousand people. Right? Think about that. Just because he numbered the people. Before they went to war, they numbered the people. God says, don't number them. And it's interesting because the Bible says Satan put it into David's heart to number the people. Satan put it into a man after God's own heart. Satan put it into his heart to number the people, and David numbered the people. Wow. Man, I mean, that's one of those things, Satan made me do it. Well, man. But, here's the thing, decisions. Are we going to obey God? Because the devil puts things in our hearts. The devil whispers in our ear all the time. I know he does mine. Maybe you're better than me. I don't know. But, man, we have to make these decisions. You ever watch old Fred Flintstone back in the day? You probably never saw Fred Flintstone one time, did you, back there? Yeah. But Fred, how many of you ever watched Fred Flintstone? Yeah, see, okay, you did watch Fred Flintstone. Yeah, but I remember the little pitchfork red suit, Satan, Fred Flintstone on one shoulder, and the little angel telling Fred, who's Fred going to listen to? That pitchfork Fred, little Fred on his shoulder, or the good Fred, But that's the same battle you and I have all the time. And that's why we need to be prayerful. That's why we need to pray without ceasing. The only thing God says to do without ceasing is to stay in that connection with God, because these voices, we're hearing voices, but these voices, really, they will speak to us. And so whose voice are we going to hear the loudest? Whose are we going to listen to? And so these are all important things. That's why we have to be prayerful. So anyways, we moved to the next thing here. Deferential. Man, why the author pick such a word? I don't know, right? What does deferential mean? Deferent. That means to be humble. That's what it means. I had to look that up myself, if I'm being honest, right? Deferential. What is deferential? It means to be submissive, to show deference, right? To show deference. That means two people are going to the door, and you see that you're going to arrive there at the same time. There's a little awkwardness there, so you back up, and you let them go first. That is deference, right? That is humility, humble submission, right? Humble submission. So that's the first thing. First thing she did was pray, 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 pray. Second thing she did was she put on that royal attire. What is she doing? She's showing submission. She's showing, I am your queen. You are my boss. You are my king. She's reminding him of that. Did it work? Oh, yeah, it worked. Right? Because he looked out there and says, my queen. His heart was touched. His heart was touched by that. Right? So she showed humility. She went in there, man, she was prepared spiritually. She was prayed up. She was prepared physically. She went in there looking her what? Best. Right? I'm going to do the best I can do. And you know, some of us, that's not good enough. We can do the best we can to look good, but it just doesn't. That was supposed to be a joke, folks. Okay, it fell flat. All right, it fell flat. But anyway, she put on her royal dress. She had a calm demeanor. Right? Could you imagine? She's probably sweating bullets. But you know what? God gave her a calmness. And the king raised that scepter. She walked over there, touched it, and she kept her composure. She kept her cool. Who did that? God gave her the grace to do that, right? So it impressed the king. Man, this is one brave woman. He was impressed by that, right? And I think her beauty helped too, of course. But 4 reasons Esther could be calm. And this is a real good thing for the lesson, very practical to help us today in our daily lives. 4 reasons Esther could be calm in the face of danger. Number 1, the Jews had been fasting and praying for 3 days, asking God to intervene and to save them. So how do we stay calm? Pray, talk to God, right? Depend on God. Number 2, Esther knew that God had covenanted with the Jews. You know, what did she do? She remembered God's promises. So what should we do when we're up in arms about things? We should remember God's promises, right? He's with us. He knows our needs before we even ask. So that'll help calm us. Number 3, Esther knew that God of Israel was a forgiving God who would hear his people when they humbled themselves and prayed, right? And so it's a very important Bible principle. Draw nigh to me, I'll draw nigh to you. Humble yourself, God says, I'll exalt you, right? But if you're full of pride, I'll bring you low. And so that helped calm her. She says, hey, God's a forgiving God. He's a loving God. I just need to show humility and come to God, right? Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, right? How should we come unto God? With pride and arrogance? No, God's not going to hear us. But we come unto him saying, God, I need you. I need you to give me comfort. I need you to help me, right? And then number 4, Esther saw God's favor in that he had already allowed a remnant of the Jews to return to their land. So God was already working. That brings calmness. So we realize, you know what? God is working. He's working in some wonderful ways. And so whatever it is in your life, you realize, yeah, okay, this isn't the way I would like it. But you think, hey, God is working in other areas. God's still there. He's still working, right? So what can we take away from this? When we find ourselves in dire straits, be prayerful and keep your composure. Because the devil doesn't want us to keep our composure. Because once again, when we lose our composure, we do things, we say things that we shouldn't do. So we need to stay calm, right? That's important. Philippians 4 talks about this. Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. Be careful for nothing. All right? What does that mean? Don't sweat it. That's what God's saying here. Be careful for nothing. Don't worry about it. Be calm. Be careful for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the God of peace, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ. And that was what Esther was going through. She could stand before the king in confidence. Why? Because she had faith. That's why she could do it. Favored. Part C, she was favored. He saw the queen standing in the court, verse 2, and she obtained favor in his heart. Who did that? God did that, right? God did it. And so God has the power to intervene. And so don't ever forget that. Again, Proverbs 21, verse 1, the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. As the rivers of water, he turns it whithersoever he will. And then number 2, we're going to go quick here because of time. Esther's plot. Esther's plot, right? What was her first thing she did? She requested Haman to a banquet. And we talked about that. And then once they went to that banquet, she requested Haman, right, a second banquet, right? Now, this is amazing, right? And by the way, we talked about this. Haman's pride goes through the roof, right? When he leaves the meeting, who's he running to? Mordecai. But you know what? He was floating so high, he said, you know what? I'm going to refrain myself from even letting this guy bother me. And so he runs home, calls his friends, calls his wife, said, you won't believe what happened, tells them all about it, right? But anyways, so we're going to go to our final point because we're running out of time, right? God's plan, all right? God's plan for the people. Think about what God did here. Part A, the king's sleeplessness. The king could not sleep. Who do you think did that? God. God put something in the king's heart. Hey, it's been a while since I've had a reading of the records, if you will. What's been going on in the kingdom? These were reports. You know, President Trump, President Biden, they get reports every day, security reports. They get all kinds of reports. They read it, right? Helps them to stay in touch with what's going on. So here's King Ahasuerus. He can't sleep, so he says, hey, man, it's been a while since you've read the records. What's going on around me, right? So get a load of this. Esther chapter number 6. On the night the king could not sleep, he commanded to bring the book of records of the chronicles that they were read before the king. And where do you think the chamberlain read? Look what it says. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So king's laying in bed, can't sleep. The chamberlain's reading this story. Oh, here's a guy named named Mordecai. He overhears this conversation that we talked about a few weeks ago, and he basically saved your life. They were going to kill you. They were going to assassinate you. And the king said, what honor, what dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? Then the king's servants that ministered unto him, nothing was done for this guy. Nothing. This guy saved my neck and nothing was done. What was his name again? Mordecai. Now keep in mind, the next day they're going to a banquet. Keep in mind, we didn't read it because of time, but keep in mind when Haman called his wife and his friends, his wife said, I'll tell you what you need to do. Now that you're so even more powerful, you need to take care of this Mordecai. You need to build a gallows. Great idea. Start building it at once. So guess what? Think about everything that's happening here. Haman's home sleeping, thinking, man, tomorrow's the day. I'm going to go to this banquet, and not only that, I'm going to be done with Mordecai. He's sleeping like a baby. Over here's the king. He can't sleep at all. Wow, who do you think did that? Hey, bring me the records, the chronicles of the king. Okay. He starts reading about a guy named Mordecai. Mordecai? Who is this? Right? Man. And by the way, a little sidebar. Mordecai did this good deed, nothing happened. Could you imagine what he was thinking? Man, here I saved the king's neck. What did I get out of it? What did I get out of it? Man, what a lousy bum this king is. Didn't even give me a gift certificate to Hardee's, you know. Didn't give me anything. And so keep this in mind as we close. God sees and God knows. Just because you're not rewarded for it right now, and that's what we expect sometimes, and that's what the devil tells us. Look at God. man, you're serving God, you're tithing, you're doing this, you're serving, and what good is it doing? Right? I know none.